I am from a large family of 11 children. We lived in many rural towns in the Midwest. And at the time of this encounter, the city we lived in had busted 300 people. The closest town was 25 minutes away, and we needed a local police department. In our village, there was a road that led to a vast canyon where some of the residents of that small town lived. One of the families up there taught vocal lessons. So my mom and 3 sisters were headed home from there when something strange happened. They were driving along the dirt canyon road when suddenly lights were all around the car from directly above them. My mom sped up and suddenly the lights were on top of the hill where they were approaching, and they noticed that it was a round craft with multicolored lights shining down underneath it. My mom pulled over to take a moment to look at it. And the second she parked, the craft started moving towards them again, but very slowly. My mom slammed into gear and sped out of the canyon, the lights following them the entire time. I was very young at the time, being the youngest, but I remember them coming in and frantically talking about lights following them home. My dad and I ran outside and out next to our house. We had a detached garage and workshop, and the UFO was hovering above the garage in perfect silence. We just kind of stared at it. It never landed, and just after a few moments the thing disappeared within seconds, going like light-year speed. There was no sound or gust of wind from the takeoff, it just was there, and then it was gone. I remember thinking I should feel scared at the time. But for some reason, none of us really felt afraid of it until it was gone. I was surprised, but we didn't really feel like we were in danger in the moment and never did come back. And I've never had an experience like this ever since. But it's something I'll forever remember. The silence, I'll forever remember the silence. How can something like that? How can something that big move that fast be that silent? It still intrigues me 30 years later. It has hooked me on UFO sightings ever since. I love the woods, and always have the peace and serenity it brings me is unmatched. That being said, I experienced something that I still have trouble explaining. Hunting is tremendous in my hometown and the state. So I decided to try to bag a deer 3 seasons ago. I set up my tree stand and cameras, put out some feed, and would sit out there for hours just waiting for some unlucky deer to walk by. The land I had permission to hunt was near my family's home, so I could walk to my stand. The land surrounds a bridge for the railroad. The tracks are over the gravel road with a creek that constantly floods in school. It was a favorite spooky activity that we would go to this bridge that has a lot of history, because my town used to be a sundown town. And in the days of segregation, if a person of color was caught outside after the sun was down, they were home from the bridge. Many lives were snuffed out under that. I had been sitting in my stand and the sun quickly descended. It isn't safe to hunt after the sun goes down. Regardless, as I was about to climb, a small buck walked out of the tree line. I sat and watched him. I noticed he was limping. His front leg was broken, and I was always taught to show mercy when I saw something like this, so I drew my bow and shot. After the shot he ran off, and I slowly climbed down to begin tracking the blood. After 30 minutes of no luck finding him, I called my friend who was a good tracker. When he showed up, we started following the trail again. By this time, the sun had gone down entirely and was pitch black. After tracking for an hour or so, we finally spotted him lying at the base of a large tree. I called my brother to bring his truck so we could get the deer home and process it. So my friend Jay and I sat and waited for him to show up. Sitting in the pitch black, we were enjoying the silence when the sound of pounding footsteps snapped the silence. The footsteps were heavy and fast and were not an animal. It was bipedal and was quick. Jay and I sat there and I will never forget the look on Jay's face and the horror in his eyes. We decided to stand up and discover who or what was out there. We flipped on our headlamps and started yelling, "Who's out there?" No response came and the silence returned. No footsteps were running away. And no other noises were heard. My brother showed up not long after, and we loaded the deer. Jay and I decided it was probably one of the poor spirits stuck under the bridge. And the deer blood attracted it, or maybe it was something else. This isn't my only experience near this bridge. But that is a story for another day. I swear I saw her by no interaction. When I was about 10 years old, I was alone in a part of the schoolyard during the morning break in the country I lived in back then. It was common for schools to have two breaks, a 30 to 45-minute long one in the morning and a 1 hour long one at lunchtime. There was a tall, big tree there. And I was sitting on one of the large roots that stuck out of the ground. Suddenly, I heard someone approaching me. I turned to see who it was and noticed it was one of my friends. She said, "I bet you can't catch me." I told her I could do it, and we started running around the tree while I tried to reach her and catch her. We were both laughing, and she was right. She was too fast for me to get her. Then one of my classmates yelled my name. I stopped running around and turned. The boy who called my name asked, "What are you doing running around the tree by herself?" I was about to tell him I wasn't alone when I saw that my friend was no longer there. She was just a few seconds ago, I swear. It was absolutely extraordinary. I just told the boy, it wasn't anything. I just felt like doing it. Later that day, I saw my friend and she came and said, "Hey, how have you been?" It was like she hadn't seen me that day. I didn't say anything about it or what had happened earlier. But while we were talking, she mentioned that she had spent the break in her classroom talking with some of her friends, which was true because I asked them later, and they corroborated her story. This made me think I was crazy, as it was impossible that she could be in two places at the same time. Several years have passed since that day, and I still can't find an explanation for what happened. And I have never told anyone about it. I still don't know if it's something supernatural, a glitch in the matrix, or if I just imagined it, but I do know what I saw. I would appreciate it if anybody would know or happen to understand what's going on. Had been sailing for 4 decades now. Mainly I sail alone. I like to go out and just enjoy the ocean as well as do a fair bit of fishing. I have a smaller boat for such things. Nothing fancy or big, but big enough to get around and be comfortable enough to sleep in during the short stints that I would sleep. In all my years of boating around and sailing the Atlantic, I've never had an encounter quite like the one I found myself in during the trip I'm about to speak on. First off, being that I sail alone, I generally don't sleep for very long. Depending on where you're at and the preparation to make, you can sometimes get some real sleep on the sea. But I've always trained myself to sleep no more than 2 hours at a time, as I've always been worried I'd wind up off course or worse. I'm familiar enough with the ocean. I have comfortably slept here and there for 8-hour periods. But I've tried to make no habits out of that because it's definitely not safe to do so. That's a long story though, and I'm getting a bit sidetracked anyway, for the purposes of keeping my identity private. From henceforth, just call me Dave. The ocean is a beautiful place, and in my opinion, it's a world of its own. Sailed the seas long enough and you'll find that when on land, you're itching to go back out again. For me, having done this sort of thing for most of my life, it has gotten to the point I consider the ocean my home. Life on land is all right. But there is nothing like the thrill and adventure of the unexpected. The ocean provides that in spades. On this occasion, I had been out at sea for about a week. It was late May in 2012. And I was fishing and relaxing. The days had been good to me, and I was grateful for another opportunity to be out on the ocean, taking some vacation time off work. The day went wonderfully and the week was coming to an end. I would need to head back in a few days to make sure I got home on time to be there for all of my obligations. Night had eventually fallen, and the forecast called for high winds and unsettled ocean with some rain. This is nothing I'm not used to handling, but I decided to try to make it through the night and the storm before attempting to sleep. Everything was calm till about 9 p.m. when the sun had completely set itself and the storm had actually come upon me to the point that I felt like I was in some sort of movie. The waters were rough and the storm certainly made his presence known to me. This didn't bother me in the slightest, and I was fully prepared to handle myself until I heard her voice. I lost my wife to brain cancer roughly 7 years prior to this event. She was the love of my life, and I had been with her for over 30 years when she passed. She used to go with me on my lengthy excursions out to the ocean. And she was, and is the only woman I would ever and ever will want in my life. The voice I heard was my wife's. I'm positive of it. I was wide awake, and this happened. At the first bolt of lightning, I swore I saw her. Like you might see someone standing just in the distance. She looked real. And she seemed to be trying to tell me something. I obviously was very perplexed. And I thought initially that maybe sleep deprivation was getting to me. I remember refocusing and looking around me, only to realize that the wind was picking up immensely. My radio was beginning to dip in and out, my boat was beginning to be slammed. Keep in mind, as I said earlier, my vessel is nice and fully caped for both handling the waters, but it's also smaller, and only now did I realize the storm was much stronger than the initial forecast said it would be. I didn't panic, as the weather taking a sudden turn is fairly common. That said, I did try to radio out, and as I did, I got nothing. The next thing I knew, I looked up in time just to see a large surge of water hit my boat and knock me off my feet. I tried to turn the boat, but it was too late. Before I knew it, my boat was flipped and I was thrown into the ocean. I remember trying to get my head above water, popping in and out, taking short breaths before bam, I was hit by another massive wave of being dragged under. I fought with all my might and fury, swimming to the surface again, gasping for air. I looked up and saw my wife. I could faintly make out 2 words. Keep swimming. I know how crazy this sounds on instinct. I trusted my wife's voice, and I swam in her direction. I had no way of knowing for sure if this was really her, or how it was even possible. But in my heart, something told me to keep swimming her way. It was hit with another blast of water from the ocean. Everything was backward, up was down was up. I truly felt like I was lost. Still, I pressed on, swimming with every bit of strength I had, looking out and gasping for air. I could see my wife once again. She wore the red dress she wore the night we celebrated our 30th anniversary. I just remember focusing on her and not really thinking about anything else, but trying to keep afloat. The truth is, reflecting back later, part of me did wonder if I died there, would I be reunited with her? Still, in the moment, I was too focused on her image and survival to give up. I pressed forward and swam with all of my mind. If it weren't for her guiding image and her voice, I'm sure I would have been completely lost. I went under and would lose my way, but would always be able to follow her voice. I probably would have swam circles until I died. Thankfully, as I got closer to my wife, I felt a renewed vigor well up within me. It was because of her, and to this day, I can't explain how that I'm still alive. I swam in her direction for what felt like forever. And I'm sure at least was an hour until she faded. She faded before me within a few feet. She was close enough that I could reach out, but upon trying to touch her, I only saw her sweet smile. And then she faded. Instead of her skin, I felt the water of just a few feet further in front of me. My boat was sitting upright again, bobbing around in the ocean. I was able to reclaim my boat soon after the storm died down. And honestly, I'm not really expecting anyone to believe me. But that night, I believe my wife saved me from beyond the grave. I can't explain it. I don't know if it was her ghost, my mind, playing tricks on me and using her image to keep him. I don't know if she was a ghost, my mind playing tricks on me and using her image to keep me going like some kind of weird survival trick, or if it was something else entirely. But to this day, that is the strangest and most dangerous thing I've ever done on the ocean. The trip back home was uneventful. I never heard my wife's voice or saw her again or ran into any other storm or problem. I still go boating today on the ocean. But I wouldn't have been able to survive that night without her there. I won't pretend to know how or why it happened. But I'm thankful it did. And I hope when God finally does decide it's my time, that she'll be waiting for me in the afterlife. Being in the Navy, you get to see a lot of the world, and with 2 deployments currently under my belt, I have seen a lot of crazy things. However, this occurred during my last deployment. And it's a moment that I will never forget, not just because it left me physically shaken, but because there was no explanation for what we saw that night. I watched from midnight to 4 in the morning, and my watch station is in a little area right behind the bridge. In this area, I was the supervisor of a small team of 4 others, ensuring they did their job correctly, which was to make sure we knew where other chips were, who they were, and where they came from. The midnight watch is usually dull and as nothing really happens around that time. The bridge team tended to keep to themselves around that time and only came to bug us when they had questions about a ship or any possible ships in the area. We had one person out on the bridge to talk to the lookouts and people stationed around the ship who made visual reports to the bridge on other boats or any marine life near us to ensure I knew what the lookouts were reporting. I hooked up a speaker to the station that guards used to talk to each other and make reports. Usually during this time, the lookouts like to talk about nonsense and gossip amongst each other, although I will admit a lot of their conversations were funny. On this particular night, however, one of the lookouts made a report to the bridge, and I knew something was wrong because she sounded highly nervous. Here's the initial statement. Bridgeport Fantail. Go ahead, Portmanteau Bridge. The water behind us is glowing. Say again. I can't explain it any other way, but the water is glowing. What the hell? I said to myself. I went out to the bridge and talked to my guy, ensuring he also heard what I heard. We both reported it to the junior officer of the watch, or the JOW. And he thought it was weird as well, but claimed that it might be bioluminescent algae. Although uncommon, it did make sense to me. I told my guard to return the word to lookout, hoping it would calm her down. As I returned to my station, I heard the lookouts talking to the speaker, teasing and making fun of her reporting glowing algae. After that, all seemed normal. About 20 minutes later, I heard the lookout come out again, talking to one of the other lookouts, starboard fantail, port fantail. Yeah. Do you see the water glowing in the distance? Yeah, what about it? I think it's following us. You're stupid. No, seriously, look at it. We passed it about 20 minutes ago, we shouldn't be able to see it anymore. You're either really tired or paranoid. You need to calm down. After that, the lookout again reported it to the bridge, and this time to the JOW, told him to pass the word to inform him that the glowing algae was getting closer. I went outside to check it out. And even I saw it. Although it could be nothing. I was on edge. Then, out of nowhere, I know the glow rapidly was getting closer to the ship, coming in from behind at a speed that made no sense for it to be algae. I ran back inside and heard the lookouts making the report. But before I could inform the bridge, the water around the ship started to grow intensely. The glowing faded slowly, then got brighter every few seconds. And everyone on the bridge was utterly dumbfounded. No one moved or spoke a word, they just stood in place watching as the bridge filled in and out with this ominous green glow. This went on for a couple of minutes, but felt like an eternity. I don't know what the others were thinking, but I thought this was the end. We then watched as whatever was glowing beneath the ship slowly moved away from us, moving ahead of us. Then, in a sudden flash of light, it was gone entirely. Everyone on the bridge remained silent for about another minute. And even though everyone was shaken up, we all tried to get past it, and many went on like it never happened. Since there was no official report of the incident, and it was never passed down to the other watches. This event technically only happened to those who witnessed it, which happens more than you would think out in the open ocean. The captain should have been informed of what happened. I have not been able to stop thinking about that day, and I haven't told anyone about it. Not even my wife and family. Not because they won't believe me, but because they worry about me constantly when I'm out at sea. So I've kept it to myself until now.